Yesterday, just switching gears from Florida briefly, yesterday it was announced that Trey Gowdy, chairman of the House Oversight Committee, retiring from Congress at the end of his term, is launching an investigation into the hiring and background checking of former White House staff secretary Rob Porter.
Just so that I'm clear, will the Oversight Committee be launching an investigation into this?
We did last night.
So it's official.
That word probably means more to you than it does to me. What matters to me is that we are directing inquiries to people that we think have access to information we don't have. You can call it official. You can call it unofficial. Those words don't mean anything to me. What means something to me is I'm going to direct questions to the FBI that I expect them to answer. And if they don't answer them, then they're going to need to give me a really good reason, and you'll learn that reason, and you can judge whether or not it's a sufficient reason or not. But unless you're Jack Bauer, you can't make people answer questions. I've been trying for 7 years to get certain people to answer questions without a whole lot of success. We're going to try, and then we could use your help if they say no.
I love Trey Gowdy. I'm going to miss him.
I know.
That was great. For more on this topic and many others, including a piece that Andy McCarthy wrote about this week, or a piece he wrote on the topic of this kind of revisiting Michael Flynn's plea deal in the wake of the revelation that Byron York reported in the Washington Examiner that Comey didn't believe Flynn lied to the FBI in the relevant interview. It's very strange. For more on this, please be joined again by Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, contributing editor, National Review. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, Andy, how are you?
Good. Hey, before we get into the memos and the Russian collusion and the plea deals, as a former federal prosecutor, somebody who obviously worked with the FBI in your day-to-day job, this report that the FBI was tipped off about the shooter back in September, the school shooter in Florida, made an initial contact with the tipster. Then the tipster never heard from them again until yesterday, after this guy who said he wanted to be a school shooter became a school shooter. Did that 5-month gap, and we don't know what the FBI did or didn't do, but does that strike you as curious? Is it something where the FBI is going to have to provide a full accounting of what they did and didn't do?
Well, it's curious, but it reminded me, Dan, of remember the shooting by that jihadist in the club in Orlando?
Orlando, yeah.
A few years back. We had a similar sort of a situation where, the Bureau had looked into some things that had been raised, and after a while they, not a lot was done and they closed the case. And I think, obviously all this stuff has to be looked at, and in the wake of something horrific like yesterday, obviously it will be. But people tend to forget that, in the whole country, there are only about 13,000 FBI agents covering everything that they cover. And, with that kind of sparse resources, most law enforcement is actually rubber meet the road. Law enforcement is mostly local.
Right.
With the FBI dealing with big national priorities, you would hope. And the thing is that there's not enough of them that they can afford to, stay on every single thing that's suspicious for a long period of time. Generally speaking, you open an investigation, and if there's not, real strong reason to continue it, and there's not something on the table to prosecute, it gets closed and you move on to the next thing. And sometimes when you move on to the next thing, something tragic happens in the last thing, which is, always awful. But
if you look at his digital footprint, I mean, his social media posts were very disturbing. And who's in charge of monitoring that? I mean, is it the FBI's job? Is it local jurisdiction? Who can watch that to make sure that this doesn't happen again?
Well, Amy, it's probably a lot of different organizations. I think Homeland Security comes into play there as well on the federal level, and obviously the state and local police. But you bring up a good point, which is that sometimes when you have so many agencies that are responsible for something, everybody's kind of assuming that the other guy's doing it, and that's how things fall through the cracks. So, we probably should get a lot better in terms of what the lines of responsibility are. But I always think it's way too early in this thing to start, making conclusive statements about, who could have done a better job.
Yeah, for sure. Turning to General Michael Flynn and his plea deal for lying to the FBI. He's awaiting sentencing against the backdrop of the reporting this week by Byron York at Washington Examiner that I mentioned, that Jim Comey reportedly told members of Congress he didn't believe Flynn lied to him, or certainly didn't say anything untrue intentionally. And then Bob Mueller picks up the case, and he comes to a very different conclusion. Obviously, you wrote about this. How do you process those seemingly conflicting opinions?
Yeah, well, I've been pointing out, I think since December probably, that this is a very peculiar situation. And one of the reasons I wrote about it initially was because I thought it defied the caricature of this guy Strzok, who, the FBI agent who has all these texts. And I had a number of people who were a little annoyed at me back when I said this, but I thought that we ought to hold up on condemning Strzok too much, because it didn't seem to me like he was a rabidly anti-Trump person in terms of the way he did investigations. And my exhibit A on that was Flynn, because it was already out there that Comey had told the House committee that the reason Flynn had not been charged with a crime, back in January of 2017, when he spoke to the FBI, the reason he hadn't been charged with a crime is that the agents who interviewed him believed him. And the agent who ran that interview was Strzok. So it seemed to me that Strzok was probably an exculpatory witness for Flynn. And what happened here is that once Comey was gone and Strzok was gone, and, Sally Yates, who was the one who was pushing the Flynn investigation in the first place, she was gone. It looked like Flynn was in the clear. And then all of a sudden, Mueller's very aggressive team comes in, and suddenly they decide they know better than the people who were in the room actually questioning Flynn, and they charge him. And then it turns out that, literally a day or two after they charge him, all this information comes out about Strzok and, the texts. And there's a lot of reason to doubt that Mueller and his team alerted Flynn to not only the information that was going to be out there about the government's witnesses that would have been unflattering if there had been a trial here, but also did Mueller let Flynn know that the FBI had judged that he was honest in their interview with him, and that to the extent that there were factual discrepancies, they were failures of recollection, not an attempt to be dishonest.
Well, and so what the implications of this, though? I mean, and the implications of this for Mueller's investigation writ large.
Well, it's not easy to say, because it's not like, let's say Flynn can get his plea back, right? Even though he's waived everything. Typically in a plea agreement with the government, you waive all your trial rights and you waive all your appellate rights, and that strikes people when they first hear it as unfair. But the benefit that you get out of a plea agreement is that you get to settle the case on, less charges than you would have faced if you had gone to trial. And it may still be, Flynn can't be thinking that if he gets his plea back and he goes back to square one, that Mueller is just going to go away. They could still prosecute him for whatever else they have on him, which may be nothing, but it may also be, more than he's dealing with now. And I think part of the reason he wanted to plead out, as I understand it, is he was under great financial stress, and he was concerned that there may be charges brought, or an investigation at least brought, against his son. So,
that's right.
There's a lot hanging in the balance for Flynn, and what it means for Mueller's overall case. I don't know, because I never regarded Flynn as a cooperating witness against anyone. I think if there had been a collusion case against Flynn, Mueller would have made him plead guilty to collusion and would have made him allocute at the time of his guilty plea, explaining, what Trump had done and what everybody else had done in a big collusion conspiracy.
Do you think
we didn't have him do that because I don't think they have that kind of evidence.
Do you think Flynn's going to spend any time in jail?
I don't. I really hope that, I think, Amy, if Trump was in a position to do it politically, I think he'd pardon him. And I think he should be pardoned because I don't think, it looks to me like this is a very fugazi case on him. Mm-hmm. Even if you assume that he lied, I mean, when you look at what he says he did, it doesn't really look like the lie of the century. And if you look at the other side of the ledger, this is why I think Trump was right a year ago when he said to Comey, the equities were pointed in the direction of cutting Flynn a break. I mean, the guy is basically ruined. He had the job of a lifetime. He was able to hold it for 24 days. His prospects are not anything like they were at the time that the Trump administration began. And it looks to me like he didn't do anything wrong. They investigated him for things that an incoming national security advisor is supposed to do. And it was a crackpot investigation to the extent that they thought it was, he had violated the Logan Act, which is just nonsense. So I think he's been through a lot. He should be pardoned.
All right. He is Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, contributing editor at National Review. He is a must-read, especially in these times with all of these investigations. Andy McCarthy, thanks so much for joining us, Ken. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.